Dr. Gemma Galdon Clavell, thank you very much for being with us. And we're going to talk about Internet of Things. And when we say Internet of Things, I think that layperson actually doesn't get the full idea what we're talking about. So you actually gave a very good example, connecting everything that we're living through today with Romeo and Juliet. So maybe we can start with that.
Well, I used to work on the sociology of public space, and I remember reading Richard Sennett, The Fall of the Public Man, and he talks about the need to build cities where Romeo and Juliet can fall in love. And then he was talking about more Jane Jacobs, the need for informal social control. But that image has really helped me translate my learnings in the sociology of public space into the world of technology and augmented reality and Internet of Things and the interconnectedness of everything that happens around us. Because at the end of the day, the Internet of Things is about connecting everything and so recording everything. Mm-hmm. And so Richard Sennett's idea is very relevant here. With Romeo and Juliet, you have two people that fall in love outside of the law of the time because their families are against each other. They're at war with each other, and so their romance is illegal in the eyes of their family. So they need to hide. They need to hide their love. They're not hiding criminal activity. They need to hide their love, and so they need to find the dark spaces in the panopticon, so that their parents will not find them. And I think I'd like for us to build cities where Romeo and Juliet can fall in love, where teenagers can explore the limits of identity, where teenagers can kiss outside of the gaze of their parents or any authority. And I think that applies not only to teenagers and Romeo and Juliet, but it's a nice way of thinking of the kind of cities that we want and the things that we do want to respect and the levels of anonymity that we need in order to be happy.
We live in a society in which terms of control and ownership are completely reconsidered. So who's going to be responsible for keeping those terms in a way that we as citizens can benefit most of Internet of Things and keep our privacy ours?
Well, it's a challenge. The way that the information society and digitalization has been created up till now has been very much at the expense of people's rights and people's control of their own data. Mm-hmm. So we're in a process of primitive accumulation of data. There's this promise that data is going to be the oil of the 21st century. Mm-hmm. So everyone who can get data is out there trying to get it, even if they don't know what to do with it. And so that means that the internet society is being built at the expense of our privacy and our control of the data because of this promise of data having a lot of value in the future. So we see a lot of inefficiency and a lot of bad decisions being made because of this promise of money sometime, like at some point down the line. And I think that's something we need to reconsider because I think there's a bubble around data, and the bubble is what's making us vulnerable. When some of the actors in the data world start to realize that there is value in respecting people's privacy, then I think that the conversation is going to start changing. But right now, we have no control over our data, even though legally, we should have control. There are legal constraints and things that should be happening, but what we're seeing is a world of complete disregard of legal limitations and where there's just this race for the primitive accumulation of data.
Mm-hmm. Can we say that we as the consumers and we as citizens and we as audience are actually learning in a process of trial and errors and where it's going to get us in the future?
I think that we talk about Snowden a lot, and I think Snowden's been very important in getting us to realize the extent of the surveillance society and how public and private interests are in bed together. But I think that in terms of the broader world, it's not so much about the Snowdens, it's about the Taylor Swifts and the famous people that have their data stolen and hacked, and us realizing that data is a valuable thing and that we cannot protect. That there's a lot of devices out there offering us services and saying, don't worry, we will keep your data, but actually they cannot protect it because they don't anonymize it, and so they're very vulnerable to hacking. Every time something like this happens, I think we realize, well, actually this space that I thought was safe is not as safe as I thought. This cloud is not a secure cloud. And it cannot only be accessed by governments and companies, but also by hackers. And I think that through this trial and error, we're realizing that we need to be paying more attention to those privacy policies and the security, the levels of security in the devices or the systems that we buy. Unfortunately, that only works for consumer products. And so we can afford to make mistakes with consumer products, because maybe the worst that can happen is that a nude picture of you ends up online, which is very serious, but still it's not life-threatening. But there's other things happening. Our data is being gathered in other spaces where we cannot afford as a society to find down the line that we made those mistakes. I think there's a really great example with smart meters. Smart meters are being installed in all houses in the European Union. It's a EU regulation. So by 2020, everyone will have to have a smart meter in their home. When they were installed in the Netherlands, there was a consumer-led campaign against smart meters for health reasons. There was talks of radiation, but also for privacy reasons. And one of the images that they used was the house of Anne Frank. You know, Anne Frank survived for several years in the back of one house, hiding from the Nazis. She was later found and ended up in a concentration camp. But what the campaigners were saying is, if we had had smart meters in the Second World War, Anna Frank would not have lasted one day, because a smart meter knows exactly how many rooms are in your house, so you cannot hide anything. And so if we build those systems without taking into account that we cannot take democracy for granted, or that they might be legitimate reasons for which we want to keep something secret, I think we're in deep trouble as a society. And I don't think that's something we can afford to learn by trial and error, because ever is a war, and ever is Anna Frank dying.
I think that we're pretty much aware that huge companies in business actually controls and gathers all the data about us. But you are, again, pretty much optimistic about the power that we as citizens have in that process of sort of changing environment in which someone else is controlling us, or, I don't know, looking at us and gathering data about us. So how do you feel about that? I mean, are we as citizen and audience, do we have that power?
We should have it, that's for sure. I'm optimistic. I don't know whether I'm optimistic because I feel I need to be optimistic, but I do see things that show that the conversation is changing. There's more and more people that are aware of these things. And as I said, the impact on your life can be so significant. And there'll be more and more people realizing the danger of not caring about your data. There's going to be more and more cases of data theft, of cybercrime. So people are going to realize, well, actually that's a whole new sphere of vulnerability, not only of access to services, but also vulnerability. So I want this new space to exist, but I also want it protected. And so I want regulation. And so we need to come up, I usually talk about a new social contract around data. We need to make sure that data is collected in a responsible way that keeps us owning or in control of that data. So we should be able to know what happens to our data at any given time. And we should be able to delete that data in a secure way. And I think that's a conversation that we're beginning to have. But there's no doubt in my mind that with the amount of privacy disasters happening, the amount of times that we see data being stolen or misused, that the awareness of people around these issues is going to be greater and greater.
We talked about the multi-stakeholders environment in which different sides will be responsible for developing some new environment which is more responsible for citizens. So who should be involved in that kind of process?
Everyone. It's a fascinating thing, because one of the things that I'm realizing is that no one person and no one discipline has all the answers. And so the key to responsible technology is having the right people on the table. And that means making the most of sociology and law and philosophy, but also technology. You also need good encryptors and good anonymizers and better technologies out there. There's my experience, for instance, with lawyers. Lawyers tend to be very strict, and they don't, because of the way that we've conceptualized law, lawyers don't take into account the spirit of the law. They don't think about the norms that ended up being encoded as law. So their understanding of law is often very narrow. It's only about the letter of the law and finding a formal solution to a problem. When in the world of technology, with technology advancing so rapidly, oftentimes you need to go to the origin of those laws. Like, why do we care about privacy in the first place? You know, what made us as a society careful about these issues? And then when you understand that, you can find legal solutions to the problems. The same with ethicists. Ethicists have a lot to bring on the table, but for traditional ethics, discrimination is the greatest value that has to be preserved. And so if you talk to an ethicist and you ask an ethicist, so what do you think is better, mass surveillance or targeted surveillance? An ethicist will say mass surveillance because it affects everyone, and so there's no discrimination. Well, mass surveillance is not only illegal, but also not desirable from a societal point of view. And therefore, the answer of traditional ethics in itself is not good enough. But the best thing you can do is put the lawyer and the ethicist and the technologist and the sociologist and the end user together to make sure that they learn from one another. And the results that we're getting in doing this are fascinating. We are actually being able to find solutions and to design responsible technology through this process. And it's not a costly process. And it's a really fascinating process. So that's why I'm optimistic, because I can see that we have problems, we also have solutions, and it's an ongoing debate.
We can say that internet access is sort of changing our relationship with place, and there's a whole new layer over the physical world. So what's your thoughts on our relationship with reality and with physical world? I mean, are we perceiving it in a different way? And are we aware of all those virtual worlds around us and all those different layers around us?
I don't think we're that aware yet, but also because virtual reality and augmented reality are not part of our everyday lives in the way that internet is. But I think that the question we need to ask around virtual and augmented reality is the same that I ask always. If virtual reality is the solution, what is the problem? And what is virtual reality a tool of? And I fear that in technological terms, we always ask the question the other way around. It's like, oh, we have a solution, let's look for a problem. And that's not very efficient and not very good from a societal point of view. So I think that virtual and augmented reality can be fantastic tools for so many things. Like if you want to teach kids to understand how their cities were centuries ago, or in the future. There's so many things that you can, the empathy that you can create with this thing that you are seeing through augmented and virtual reality is amazing. And so as a tool, I think it's a fantastic tool, but it has to be a tool. There has to be a problem first that you want to solve and that can be solved by using those tools. It cannot be a new paradigm, because then I think it gets dangerous, because then you're creating alternative worlds, you're giving people a lot of power into curating their own life in a way that leaves the other, anything that's different or the outsider, out. And that is a problem. I think that one of the great things about society and about cities especially is that you are forced to get to know other people, to see people that don't look like you, that don't think like you. It's like this constant exposure to the other that changes your personality and your identity. And I think that's a fascinating social process by which you learn and mature and improve as a person or change as a person. If virtual reality is just a channel for you to leave everything you don't want to see out, then that is hugely problematic. And that's what comes out of an approach that puts technology at the center. I think that the problem that we want to address has to be at the center. And then we use different resources, some technological, some non-technological. We also need museums to teach children to see how the world was before and how it could be in the future. You also need documentaries. There's lots of tools that we can use to solve a given problem, but you need the problem first.
How do you see the future? What's going to happen in the future, near future? I mean, the future in which we are going to live in.
I think that the internet's going to be more and more part of our reality. I think there will be lots of processes that will be improved through technology, but I also see lots of people being left out of this new paradigm and this internet revolution. We already have that. The internet is very much a thing for younger people of a certain socioeconomic status, and that is hugely problematic. So I see a world where technology plays a greater part, and I'm not sure that's always positive, because again, I think the goal of any society should be to promote and help people to be happy. And you do that through identifying problems and finding solutions. Technology can help in that process, surely. But the goal has to be being happy and creating happy and equal societies, not societies that use technology. Using technology in itself is not a goal. And I think that there's a lot of that going on around currently. So we're going to have to change that conversation. But as I said, I think that's already happening. I can see a lot of tension there and lots of people bringing in new arguments and new needs. And so it'll depend on us all to shape this new debate, to create a new social contract around data. That means that we are in control of our data, that we are in control of the future that the data creates, and where we have the necessary legal and social guarantees to make the most of the things that we have created. Because at the end of the day, technology is the product of our society improving and bettering itself. So we've been an amazing breed and race in creating all these things, but let's make sure we make good use of them, and let's make sure we do not forget the ultimate goal. It's not technological development. I think it is, and it has to be equal, happy societies.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.